Good evening, everybody. I'm Mike Allison, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is February the 12th, 1990, and my home group is the Brentwood Full Moon Group. The Brentwood Full Moon Group meets every Friday night at 6:30 in Brentwood, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville. It's an open discussion meeting. We also have a newcomers meeting. We have an open speaker meeting the last meeting of the month, and we also have an Al-Anon and an Al-Teen meeting in the same building at the same time. So if you're ever in the Nashville area, we'd love to have you there. First and foremost, I really want to thank Mary Beth, and Jimmy for putting this on. This is an incredible weekend. Thanks to all the volunteers, all the people with the purple ribbons and the greeters and the people doing registration, all that stuff. It's just been a wonderful time. Diane and I have just had a wonderful time here. Thanks for all your love and hospitality. Thanks for Charlie back there for picking me up at the airport and getting me here. He and Kirk picked us up, and they brought us these sandwiches from a deli that I can't pronounce that are about this thick, and I'm still eating on the thing. And they took us to see Dr. Silkworth's grave this afternoon, which was a really powerful experience. One of the things I found out today is Dr. Silkworth worked with drunks like me for 30 years before he even met Bill Wilson, without success, or very little success, and until he had Bill Wilson. And it was said at his funeral that AA was probably Dr. Silkworth's reward from God, for all the tireless work he did, and he never gave up. I think he was just an untreated Al-Anon. He just kept going on and on. I don't know. I want to thank all the other speakers. I'm not going to name anybody because I don't want anybody keeping score about how many times I quote them. But I really enjoyed everything everybody's put together to make this weekend so special so far. I really want it's been said already, but I want to thank Lee again. I've really gotten a deeper respect for and an admiration for the people that record these conferences, and that's because I'm up here. Like was said earlier, I listened to cassettes when I was first sober. My sponsor would say, here, listen to this. I don't remember him asking me, do you want to listen to this? It was, here, listen to this. And it was a voice louder than my head at that time because I had this grand central head, and that would put the fire out. But what I've come to find out is that these are the people that record our history now. And there's a lot of people that I listened to when I first got sober that have gone to the big meeting now. And all we have are their recordings. And if it weren't for people like Lee and other folks doing that, it wouldn't get done. And if we don't support them, sooner or later they wouldn't come. So I hope you'll support Lee and other folks that do this. And Lee, thank you for the service you do. I really appreciate that. And I want to thank my wife, Diane, for being here. Diane's she's the love of my life. I call her Sparky because she has so much energy. She's been a long-term member of Al-Anon. She came in right after I did, and she just lights up my life. I love the program of Al-Anon and what it's done for our family. Al-Anon and Al-Teen really helped our family an awful lot and continues to pay dividends for that. But Diane and I do some of these things together sometimes, and I kind of feel kind of outgunned because, in AA we have as Bill sees it, but the Al-Anons have Lois remembers. And there's a real difference in that, but it's my turn up here this time, so. And for the Al-Anons that are here, there are promises in the big book, and there's even one in there for the Al-Anons on page 23. It says that once in a while he may tell the truth. So. And by the way, Jimmy, I saw Jimmy at a conference. I looked it up. It was in April of 2017. And he said, I want you to come to Long Branch and talk on steps 8 and 9. He said, try to get it together by then. And Jimmy, I've really tried. I really have. I don't know how it's going to come out. Several people have made comment on it. You like my tie? Did everybody see my tie? It's my Dr. Zeus tie, and I read Dr. Seuss when I was a kid, and I read it to both of our sons, and then I got to read it to our granddaughter. And about a year and a half ago, my granddaughter became my grandson. My grandson came out as a transgender man right as he was graduating from high school. And there's been a lot of, I've participated and been there and loved and supported him through his transition. And I know that's a difficult thing for people to do. And he needs my love and support more now than ever before. And I'm so grateful that I'm able to do that as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he gave me this tie for Christmas, and I just love it to death. And he's always been my Rule 62 to not take myself too seriously. This is about as intellectual as I get with Dr. Seuss. And so I always wear this tie to honor my grandson. So I'm tasked with talking about steps 8 and 9 tonight, and I've never done this before, actually, just to talk about steps at 8 and 9. So this has been something different for me to consider and maybe reflect on a little more depth about what these steps mean to me. Step 8 being made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And step 9 is humbly asking, or to made direct amends to such people wherever possible, when to do so, except when to do so would injure them or others. And I want to, before I can talk about steps 8 and 9, I got to give you a little bit of history of why I needed to do steps 8 and 9. I started drinking when I was about 14 or 15, and it progressed really quick. Alcohol just took over my life. I met Diane right as I was about to drop out of college when I was a senior. I can't blame her for that, but it's just coincidence. And she and I get married, and well, before we get married, actually we dated for about a year or two, and then I didn't have any communication skills with her, so one day I just told her we're through. I couldn't tell her that I thought she was managing me too much. And so I broke up with her for about a year. And I went on my way, and I'm drinking and I'm working hard at this family business that I started going to, and working hard and doing all this stuff. And I had to get my wisdom teeth out. You know, they give you a lot of drugs to do that. So I call up my office manager, and I said, look, I gotta go to this oral surgeon. They said I gotta have somebody with me to drive me home, and the guy goes with me to this oral surgeon. And they give me these drugs, and I mean, they could have pulled out my jawbone. I wouldn't have cared. The guy takes me out of this after they take my wisdom teeth out, and he takes me back to my apartment, and he said, look, you're a mess, and I got to get back to work. He said, let me, who can I call to take care of you while this stuff wears off? And I'm just loaded on these drugs. Now, I'm an alcoholic, I won't tell you that. I'm a real alcoholic, but I like all those party favors out there too. And so I start writing on this piece of paper, call Diane, and I wrote her work number down. Well, this guy knew I dated Diane, but he had no idea I'd been broken up with her for a whole year. But he picks up the phone and he just calls her and he says, hey, Diane, this is George, and Mike's had his wisdom teeth out. He wants you to come over and take care of him. And she's thinking, George who, Mike who? I mean, she had another guy living with her. She'd moved on. But she came over on her lunch break. And I'm writing, because I can't talk, I'm writing sideways. It was like truth serum. I mean, and I was I couldn't get past the pride and fear of asking this woman back in my life without being under the influence of something. I'm in my mid-20s, and I can't make decisions without being loaded on something by this time already. But I start writing on there, I love you, I want you back, move in with me, you know how we are. And she did 2 days later. And that was March 18th, 1975. And we've been together ever since, and every March 18th we celebrate Tooth Day. So, at any rate, we get married, and we have a couple of sons. Our sons are 41 and 37 now. They were 11 and 8 when I got sober. So I'm working hard, trying to be somebody, and she's home raising kids. And fast forward, I'm not going to give you all the rest of the crap. I'm just going to just cut to the chase. Alcoholism just started making me do crazy stuff. I used to be in the landscaping business, and we bought a house that we still live in up on a really high hill on a dead-end street. And all of our neighbors up there, most of them anyway, don't have any landscaping in their yards at all. They just live in the woods. But not me. I'm this big shot landscaping guy, and I was going to show off all my landscaping expertise, you know. And I'm trying to grow grass in front of my house, but I got all these trees in my yard too. And so at one point in time, I thought, well, this is too much trouble. I'm just going to cut all my trees down, and then I can grow grass here, and I won't have leaves to rake and all that stuff. I thought that was a pretty good idea. And it might have been, but I really wasn't sure where my property line was on one side of it. I knew where it was at the street, but our lot goes way down this steep hill. I mean, I've lived there since 1976, and it is straight up and down. I mean, I've only been down there maybe 2 or 3 times. But I get my plat where I bought my house and a compass, and I go wandering down this hillside, and I find an iron pin in the ground. And I convinced myself that that was my boundary line. And then I called a surveyor up, and I said, look, I can't even see my house where I found my property line, and I need you to mark this line for me. And these guys came out there, and I took them all the way down that hillside, and they said, we don't think this is right. But, you know, I'm an alcoholic. I've got this laser beam focus, and I know everything, and particularly if I'm paying you, I know everything, and you're going to do it my way. So I tell these guys, that's my line, just mark the line. So these guys say, okay. And so they start putting these stakes and flags in the ground, going up this hillside. And when they got through, the stakes and flags were almost touching my next door neighbor's house. You know, a sane person would have thought, well, maybe these guys are right. You know, I've even found out since I got sober that if you need a property line found, you can just call a surveyor up and they'll come out and they'll find the line for you. You don't even have to tell them where you think it is. But not me. First thing goes through my mind is, well, that old goat, he's been using my property all this time. He built this house up here before I moved here, and he's been using my land. And I'm feeling violated. Now, I don't have communication skills with him, and with anybody. I'm just straight bore ahead, you know. Self will run riot. So I'm not waiting until he gets home from Florida where he was with his wife. I got to have his trees cut down now. So I call a buddy of mine that was a tree surgeon, and he sends 2 crews out there with these 2 big bucket trucks and all these guys with chainsaws. They cut all these trees down in between our house, and it was a lot of trees. It was a lot of trees. According to a jury of my peers, it was $50,000 worth of trees in 1984. And my neighbor got home a couple of days later, and he was not happy with my surveying. And I know that gets a laugh. Only in AA would that get a laugh. You know? My next door neighbors were wonderful people. They were an older couple, and they treated us like their kids. This man spent 3.5 years on Saturdays and Sunday afternoons building their dream home. And I cut the trees down of his dream home because I thought they were in my way. Diane used to go over to their house every day, or not every day, but because they were right next door to us. She'd bring our young sons over there and visit with these people during the day. After I did that, all that stopped. I've heard Diane say in her Al-Anon story a lot of times that if I would do that today, she wouldn't side with me, that she's learned enough in Al-Anon to continue relationships with people in spite of me being a lunatic. But she didn't have those skills in Al-Anon then. So I deprived my wife and my sons that friendship with those people. After he sued me, and I had to go put up with a 2-day jury trial. This man was so angry, he asked for a jury trial in a civil case. And I remember going in the courtroom, and I wore a 3-piece suit with a vest, big gold pocket watch and a chain, and I go strutting in there like I'm some kind of businessman been falsely accused. And I'd sweated all the way through the suit, you know, that old vodka sweat smell. And I was eating these blue Valiums I had during the recesses to try to act calm, you know, while his attorney just portrayed me as a lunatic for doing this. And after the 2-day trial, the jury awarded him the $50,000 that he asked for, and they added $5,000 more punitive damages to it that he didn't even ask for. Now, for everybody that's new here tonight, I'm trying to describe what a resentment is, because I hate this guy. I think he's overreacted. And when I've got a resentment against somebody, I drink at them. That resentment burns. I mean, I'd pull in my driveway every day coming home from work, and I'd pull in my driveway and I'd see his house, and I'd think about him suing me, and I'd get mad even before I went in to see my wife and my kids. That's what I came home with every day for a long time. I mean, I'd see this man on the street. We live on this long dead-end street, and I'd ease my car over in his lane like I was playing chicken with him if I'd see him on the street. I'd curse at him when he got his mail. I was just awful to this man. And I did something else to make it worse. A couple of years before I cut his trees down and he sued me, he came to me one time and he said, "You know, I know you're in the landscaping business. Could you get me a weeping cherry tree?" He said, "My wife thinks that's the prettiest tree there is." I said, "Yeah, I can do that. What else you want?" And he said, "Well, I don't know of anything else." And I said, "Well, go ask her if there's any other shrubbery or something she wants." And I guess he thought I was trying to sell him something, but I was just trying to be a big shot. And he came to me a couple days later, and he told me some other plants that his wife wanted. And I asked him where he was going to plant the weeping cherry tree and this other stuff, and he told me. So I sent one of my crews out and got this big weeping cherry tree and these other bushes and planted them in his yard. And the man came over to my house, probably that afternoon. And he said, "Look, I didn't mean for you to plant this stuff. I was hoping you'd just get it for me." He said, "How much do I owe you?" I mean, he was just he wanted something and he knew I was in that business. It was just a straight business deal for him. He wanted to do business with his neighbor. But I think I'm such a big shot at that time. It's like, "Oh, you don't owe me anything." And I wouldn't let him pay me. It's like, you know, I got these people and I got this company. And, you know, I don't need your money. And, you know, I can just do these things. And so I wouldn't let him pay me. Well, a couple of years later, after I cut his trees down and he sued me, I went over there the very next night with some herbicide and put on that weeping cherry tree and that other stuff and killed him. Well, there are a lot of Al-Anons here tonight. These are alcoholics who go, "Ah, ha, ha." Al-Anons go, "Oh." This is how I was treating my next door neighbor. My father was a guy that he and my mother started a small business when I was born. I worked in that small business when I was a kid. And in the summertime and after school, they sent me off to college to get an education where I could be of value to that company. And I got back in that company and started out there, and I worked there 33 years until I retired 15 years ago. And my dad drank like I did. And he was kind of a hard guy to get along, but he was a great man. And after I was out of school for a while, my dad got an opportunity to take a job somewhere else for several years. And so I took over that business. And I look back at that now and I think, how in the world did I do that? I was in my 20s, but I was real aggressive and ambitious and hardworking. But I ran the business best I could. And then he came back 4 years later and he just wanted his job back. He wanted to come right back in and take over like it was then. And I told him we weren't going to do that, I was running things now. So he and I had this tremendous clash. And this went on for a long time. And I'm building up this intense hatred and resentment toward my dad, because I think he won't leave me alone. He would come out to my office every day and he'd say he wanted to help me, which meant he would come out there and stand in front of my desk and tell me what I was going to do how he was going to help me that day. And I resented it and I couldn't talk to him about it. And I even brought my shotgun to work one day. I decided that when he pulled in the driveway that I was going to shoot the windows and tires out on his Buick. That was really my plan. I thought that would give him the message that I didn't want him there. And I don't know whether I was afraid of my dad or just God kept me from doing it, but I didn't do it. And he even asked me, "What's your shotgun doing there?" And I didn't tell him. These are the kinds of things where alcoholism was taking me. It went from being the party guy, the fun guy, to just horrible. Alcoholism took me to the dark side by the time I'm in my mid-30s. I started cheating on my wife. I still don't like to talk about that. But Diane and I have always been open about that. That's a part of our story. And so I'm going to tell you about that. I was doing that and I knew it was wrong, and I had this guilt, shame, and remorse inside for doing that. And I had this hatred against my dad. Through a series of events, I wound up at a counselor's office. Actually, I went to see my doctor after I was going to shoot my father's Buick. Told him, I said, "Look, I don't know whether you want to put me in a nut house or what, but I was going to assassinate a Buick this morning, and I know that's not right." He sends me to a psychologist, and I decided I wasn't going to drink that weekend before I went to go see this lady. And I used to quit on my own. And if you have a drinking problem, you can just quit and you're fine. But when I quit drinking, I thought that was the answer. That was the only solution I had. But what happened is life would get so painful, I'd go drink again. But if I got in enough trouble or got sick enough or really did something off the wall, I would stop drinking for periods of time, but I'd always go back. But I thought I wouldn't drink that weekend, so I don't drink, and I go see this psychologist on a Monday morning. And she said, "Well, before we get started, I want to ask you a few questions." She said, "How much do you drink?" I said, "Well, I don't drink." And she said, "You don't drink at all?" I said, "No, ma'am." And she said, "Well, did you ever drink?" I said, "Yeah, I used to." And she said, "Well, how long ago did you quit?" And I said, "Last Thursday." And honest, I thought if you're not drinking, drinking's not the problem. And then she asked me something that just knocked me to my knees, though. She said, do you take any drugs?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "What kind of drugs do you take?" And I told her all these things I was taking, that I was prescribed for, and that I was getting from undocumented pharmacists or whatever you want to call them. And she said, "Do you have any drugs with you now?" And I reached in my pocket and I pulled out my change and I started digging through my change, and I had 37 blue Valiums just loose in my change, and she thought that was a lot. But I quit drinking on Friday. I guess if I thought I told her Thursday and added a day to it, it sounded like a long time. But I was a little jumpy on Friday, so I bought 100 of them. That's what I had left on Monday. So I was just a mess. And so that's when she said I need an addiction evaluation done. I went, wait a minute, I got real problems here. My wife's on my back, my dad's on my back. I had no clue that I was dying. But through a period of to another trained professional, then through a treatment center, I wound up getting into AA. All treatment did for me is knock down my ego enough to get me to come to AA. And I had to go to 5 meetings a week to stay in this treatment center, this outpatient program I was in, and I had to get a sponsor the 5th week of it. That was a requirement, and I'm really glad of that, because I got a sponsor early on, and I found the Full Moon group, which is still my home group. Because I'm talking about steps 8 and 9, I'm just going to fast forward through all that, other than I can tell you in the book where it says in how it works at some of these we balked. I balked at all the steps. I'd get a little relief. I was just seeking relief. I wasn't seeking change. And I'd get a little relief, and I'd stop until it got so painful that I had to move on and to the next step or drink or blow my brains out. Well, after I'm going to meetings and learning the lingo, doing some praying that my sponsor got me to do that I didn't believe in, but I was doing it anyway because I was just hurting so bad. I was ready for a change. I started reading this book, and I read in there that we shared in a general way and that we made amends and they were rigorously honest. And I was so consumed with this guilt, shame, and remorse for being unfaithful to my wife that I saw in there that I need to make amends to Diane. And I didn't call my sponsor. I didn't run this by anybody but me. I read the book like I thought it needed to be read. And I got in a conversation with Diane, and I told her in a general way that I'd been unfaithful to her and that I was going to be the husband and father that she deserved. And if there's anybody in there that's thinking about doing that, I want you to see me as soon as you can after the meeting. I really thought I was doing the right thing. I really did. I really and truly thought I was doing the right thing. My sponsor later told me, he said, you know, there's nothing in this book that is designed to hurt anybody. Well, it didn't go very well, as you can imagine. Then I called my sponsor and told him what I'd done. And I really try to keep my language clean up here. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what he told me. But I'm going to paraphrase what he said. He said that's why they number the steps for smart college boys like you. He said, Michael, you're not even near the 8th and 9th step. You hadn't even done a 4th step yet. And he said, and by the way, Hoss, you didn't make amends to her. All you did was dump your guilt. And when he said that, it was like somebody stuck a knife through me because I knew he was right. I think that's when I really hit my bottom. That's when I really got teachable. I thought, man, I'm trying to do this stuff by myself. I've always tried to do everything by myself. So I got teachable, and I started paying attention to what my sponsor told me to do. And all he did was, he told me early on, he said, look, I'm going to be bone-crushing honest with you, and I want you to be bone-crushing honest with me. And if you'll take the 12 steps with me like I took them with my sponsor, your life will change whether you want it to or not. And that's the best news anybody's ever told me. But there was a part of me that just wanted to do this my own way. But I hit that bottom then. And Diane didn't leave me then, and she had every right to leave me, but she didn't. And because she could see something that I was trying hard, So after I hit that bottom, that's when I did a 4-step. It's been explained in detail earlier. I did that 4-step straight out of the big book. And I went to my sponsor's house and I did a 5th step and I told him everything that I swore I'd never tell another human being or God, either one. And I got through that and I did step 6 and 7. All I did was read 2 paragraphs in 5 minutes and 2 steps thinking, oh, this is great, this is easy to do step 6 and 7 after all that sweat and bullets about doing that, all that work with that 4th and 5th step. And so what I did for the next couple of months is I tried to just say, well, I know how I've loused up my life because I've done this inventory. I'm not going to be that guy anymore. And what I wound up being was that same sarcastic, explosive, anxious, angry person that I was, but I knew why. And that's a terrible spot to get in. After I did an inventory and I know where I failed, and then I keep doing that stuff, that's when I realized that I don't think this is a self-help program. That's how I was treating it. Lack of power was my dilemma. I didn't have the power to do that. It came to a head after a couple of months. My sponsor just let me rock along. He kept telling me I need to make that 8-step list. And I just kept putting it off and putting it off because I'm fine now. You know, I even told God early on, I was in my home group, and I told my home group one night that I thought the promises were coming true for me, and I was only on the third step. And this old guy named Frank that was next to you, used to be Steve's sponsor, Frank. He said, "Don't get too well too quick. You're doing the alcoholic waltz." I said, "What's that, Frank?" He said, 1, 2, 3, drunk. 1, 2, 3, drunk. I thought, you old goat, you know, I've been to treatment. I got up-to-date stuff here, you know. But he was right. I mean, after about 10.5 months of the first 3 steps, I almost died. But I got that, I had that desperation. I did that 4th and 5th step, and I got to 6 and 7, and I paid lip service to that for a while. But then it all came crashing down. Diane's parents had a vacation home down in the Florida Keys, and I was down there, and I'd been eating my father-in-law's food, and he'd been taking me fishing every day, and I got mad at him for some reason and cussed him out on his own boat, something about how he was running his own boat. And I'd yelled at my sons because they were rambunctious. You know, boys are rambunctious at Christmas time. And I just felt awful. And so I called my sponsor, and I said, "Buff, I just cussed out my father-in-law, and I yelled at my boys, and I just feel rotten, you know." And he just laughed. He just started laughing. He said, "Congratulations, Hoss, you've been trying to remove your own character defects." He said, "Why don't you get on your knees and say the 7th step prayer like you mean it, and let's get busy on these amends." So I want to tell you about these amends, because I was so desperate then, and I knew I'd loused up that amends to Diane, or what I thought was an amends. I thought, I need to pay attention to somebody that's done this before. You know, this guy wasn't a sage guy. He was just a guy that got passed on from his sponsor. So I made that list, and it says we made a list of all persons we had harmed. I'm going to read a little bit out of the 12 and 12, just the start of it on step 8. It says steps 8 and 9 are concerned with personal relations. First, we take a look backward and try to discover where we have been at fault. Next, we make a vigorous attempt to repair the damage we have done. And third, having thus cleared away the debris of the past, we consider how, with our newfound knowledge of ourselves, we may develop the best possible relations with every human being we know. This is a very large order. It is a task which we may perform with increasing skill but never really finish. Learning how to live in the greatest peace, partnership, and brotherhood with all men and women of whatever description is a moving and fascinating adventure. Every AA has found that he can make little headway in this new adventure of living until he first backtracks and really makes an accurate and unsparing survey of the human records that he has left in his wake. And the last sentence in that of the step 8 says, it's the beginning of the end of the isolation from our fellows and from God. And by the time I got to steps 8 and 9, what I found out is the relief I got from those steps is it was the first time that I didn't feel alone anymore. I've done those inventories, and I've had people want to go back and do more 4 steps and do all this stuff and analyze themselves more and more. When I made my amends, all of a sudden it took my recovery to a whole new level to take it out into the world with the people out there. And so I made this list of the people, and I didn't try to fix it. I wrote their names. I listed every one of the people that I'd caused harm to, and I just wrote down in the second column what the harm was that I'd done to them, and I left the third column blank. And I gave it to my sponsor, and I said, "Please help me with this, Buff." And he made some suggestions to do some things, and that's what I want to talk to you about. And the first one I want to talk about is my amends to my wife. And my sponsor was about 2 years sober at the time, and he showed me in the book where he thought something was appropriate for me to write a letter and include that part of the book, of the literature. And so I wrote Diane a letter. And when I handed it to her, she read it, and she just tore it up. And I went back, not out of anger or anything. She just didn't want to hear that at the time. And so I went back to my sponsor and I said, "Well, that didn't work. What else do we do?" And he showed me in the book where he thought that was the most that I could do right now. And he said, you just be the kind of husband and father that she deserves. You keep doing that. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm hearing people talk about living amends. This is what I'm going to do. And I've tried to do that to the best of my ability. And things got better. Even though I tried to make that second amends, and it turns out maybe that could have gone a better way, because it cost Diane a long time of getting over what she needed to get over. But that's the best I could do at the time, because I'd loused up the first time and I was willing to let my sponsor give his best shot. And he did his best shot, I think. And we got along okay after that. Things started getting better. But they weren't as good as I thought they were, apparently. Because 5.5 years later, we went to a family counselor. I don't even really remember now exactly what it was. I think it was something to do with one of our kids. But we weren't in that counselor's office 5 minutes, and my infidelity came up, just like that. All those old wounds came up. And I got some information from that counselor about what kind of amends Diane wanted. And I took it to my sponsor. And I said, this is what Diane wants for an amend. And Buff said, what do you think about that? And I said, well, I don't think that'll work, and I think she'll leave me if I do that. And he just looked at me and he said, well, can you stay sober if she does? That's not what I wanted to hear. I mean, I really wanted to do anything to make this marriage work. But that's all he asked me. And I said, well, I guess I can, but that's not what I want. And he said, well, she needs closure. And that's when I realized then that I have to make amends to people the way they want it, not the way I want it. You know, the book says that I have no right to harm anybody in the process of doing it. But I have to make amends to people the way they want it, whatever the consequences are. And I'm telling you, I had to go back where it says we prayed for willingness if we weren't willing to do something, because I didn't want to do it. And I prayed and I asked God to help me do that. And so I went in that counselor's office with her, and I told her, I said, look, I'm going to make this amends to you, but I don't think this will work, but I love you, and I really, this is what you want. And I'm not going to tell you specifically what it was. I don't mind doing that one-on-one, but I don't do that from the podium. But I made that amends to her, and that was 23 years ago, last December the 18th. And I got a marriage today that's built on honesty and trust. I've got to build a relationship with this woman as a partner. I learned when I was in my sex inventory that I didn't know how to be a partner. I treated women the same way. I might as well put all the names in how I treated women when I wrote my sex inventory. I didn't know how to be a partner, and I've learned those values, sober values, from other men and other women in AA about how to be a partner. And I get a chance to build a relationship with this woman here, and it's not perfect. We have our ups and downs, but we just celebrated 44 years of marriage here in August the 9th. And if it wasn't for AA and all you people, I wouldn't have that, I want to tell you about my dad. As I told you, my dad started this business with my mom, and he and I had this contentious relationship. He was a good man, but he was just tough, and he told everybody what to do. It was just his way, because he came up from nothing. He started out with nothing and built this business. My mom died about 2 years before I got sober. And all I could do at her funeral was to sit in a funeral home with a half-gallon of Crown Royal and some other stuff and just self-pity my way through that. I know everybody has a right to grieve, but all I did was just wallow in it. And I wasn't even used to anybody when my mom died, really. I just kind of blotted that out the best I could. So my mom had passed away, and I got sober, and my dad's health started failing. He started having some accidents. And both my sisters live out of town, but they were concerned about that he would really hurt somebody driving. And because I was the responsible one now, and I was the one that had to take his car keys away from him. And a lot of times when I think I do the right thing, I'm supposed to feel warm and fuzzy, and sometimes I do the right thing and I feel terrible. And I remember when I took my dad's car keys away from him, it was like taking away his freedom. But it was the right thing to do, and you folks gave me the courage to do that. So fast forward a little while later, I get around to making amends, and I realized that, my dad had sent me to a private boys' school that I got asked to leave when I was a freshman, and he gave me all kinds of opportunities, and I turned my back on him. So I wrote him a letter that my sponsor approved of, and I thanked him for all the things he had done for me, and that I was going to try to be the son that he deserved. And I caught my sponsor said, catch him in a lucid moment, which I did, and I gave him this letter, and he read the letter, and we hugged and we cried. And we got along for a pretty good while after that for the first time. Well, he had moved into an assisted living place, and I was having to drive him around because he couldn't drive anymore. And I noticed after a period of time, our relationship got bad again. He'd tell me what to do all the time, tell me how to drive. I thought he was belittling me. I don't know what it was, but I got the feeling that because I had made amends to him, that he had something on me. Now, I don't know whether that's the truth or not, but that's what I thought at the time. And so I really got to where I couldn't stand him again. And I was arguing with him a lot, but I never could stand up to him. And I went to my sponsor and I said, look, I made amends to this guy, and yet it's like he's turned on me. What's the deal? I dislike him more than ever. And Buff said, maybe there's something else there maybe you need to look at. So I did some more inventory. I wrote some more inventory. And what I found was that my dad was a guy that had some wealth and influence. And I had used that all my life every time I need to get out of trouble. Or I was thinking, one of these days he's going to die, and I wanted his stuff. I don't like to admit that up here, but it was my greed. I never would stand up to this man because I thought he might cut me off. Now, as I'm thinking this, I'm 40 years old at the time, and I've been making my own way for years without his help. But what I really found out is that man was really one, if not my higher power. And that's when I found out what God really means to me, a higher power to me. Everybody's got a higher power. It's whatever I lean on. If it's a parent or a spouse or a business or a bottle of whiskey or myself or a sponsor, whatever I'm leaning on for support, that's what my higher power is. And what I found is every one of those worldly higher powers has just got to go away until I'm left with this God that I don't really understand, but I have faith and experience with. And so it got me closer to God to realize that. And so I told my sponsor, I said, look, I figured out what this is. It's all about my greed. And he just laughs. He said, oh, man, that's easy. He said, you just get on your knees and pray twice a day for the next 2 weeks that when he dies, he leaves everything he has to your sisters. I thought he was nuts, but I was in so much pain that I did that. And I'm telling you, this relationship with God that I've had, I heard a guy named Mo Holland say one time, you don't have to feel spiritual to be spiritual. There's lots of times I've gone through this stuff when my relationship with God kind of came and went, it seemed like. There's lots of times where I was on my knees and I thought I was just praying to air. It's like, I don't believe any of this stuff. Why am I doing this? But you know what? I get results out of it, so I do it. And I kept that persistence on. Well, I did those prayers like he asked me, and I got free of that. And I got along with my dad pretty well, and he died within a year of that time. And we died on good terms. And I talked to him the day before he passed away unexpectedly. And after my dad died, I really didn't like him. I'm just telling you the truth. I just didn't really like him. In spite of whatever he'd done to love me the best way he could, I didn't like him. And I didn't like him for a long time. And what I found out is that we ran out of time. After I made amends to him, he died, and we ran out of time. If I'd have stayed sober, whether he ever got sober or not, I know our relationship would have been better. But I never got to experience that time with him. But over time, my heart has softened. I have fond memories of my dad today. It's not all the bad stuff that I used to remember. It's all the good stuff, you know, and you've given that to me. I mentioned those two sisters. One of the things my sponsor asked me early on, he said, what's the opposite of love? And I said, well, it's hate. He said, no, the opposite of love is indifference. And I've been indifferent to both of my sisters for a long time. I have one sister that's 3 years older than I am and one that's 9 years older. The one that's 3 years older than I am got a driver's license and drove me to school when I was a kid and hauled me around and took care of me. And then she went off and got married. And then my older sister got married when I was in the 6th grade, and she raised a family, and I didn't see her. But as my alcoholism progressed, I pushed everybody away. You know, when I did my resentment list, I couldn't believe that the people I had the most resentments towards were the people that were the closest to me, that loved me the most. So I knew I had to make amends to my sisters, and I'd done a couple of terrible things that involved social situations with both my sisters on different occasions. And I went to both of them and I told them how wrong I'd been, and that whatever I could do, I wanted to make up for that damage. And both my sister and brother-in-law and my sister and my ex-brother-in-law, they all said, just keep doing what you're doing. Several years later, one of my sisters called me one day and said, I just want you to know I picked up a 30-day chip today. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, I've been going to a counselor about some other stuff, and the counselor said, yeah, it's okay what you're doing here, but when are you going to do something about your drinking? And she said, I've been watching my little brother all this time, and I knew where to go. Now, she didn't stay in AA. It wasn't for her. And I told her I love her anyway. And we have a good relationship today. My older sister, both my sisters live out of state, and I make an effort to call them on a regular basis just to talk to them and tell them I love them. I got to remember, I got to love the people that are here. Aren't here forever. We're not here forever, and I want to tell people that I love them and I care for them, and I have to show that. I don't just have to know it in my heart. I have to take that as an action. I want to tell you about both my sons a little bit briefly. Both of our sons one lives in Nevada out by Lake Tahoe, and one is in Santa Rosa, California now. And they were both in Alateen, grew up in Alateen. My older son has never been in any trouble in his life. He's the kind of guy I want to be when I grow up. He learned some skills in Alateen that have carried on through his adult life, whether he knows it or not. In his first marriage, most of the guys in his wedding were guys that he met in Alateen, and they're still friends to this day. Some of them have come in here with us, but he's not one of us. We've got to love and support him through my grandson's arrival when he was still in college, when my son was in college, and through his 2 marriages. We're able to stay in contact with my grandson's mom, who is his first ex-wife. We actually went to her wedding in Fort Lauderdale a couple of weeks ago, and she had us on the front row. She said, "You're our Nashville parents, you know, and you've given that to me as a result of making amends to folks." My other son, our younger son, I mean, after I went through the steps and made some amends. I mean, I'm in AA, Diane's in Al-Anon, our kids are in Al-Teen, we're in Al-Dog, Al-Cat, and all that stuff you can belong to, and we're the recovery family. And then I get this message from this call from my son's 8th grade principal, said, we've caught your son with some marijuana, and we've got zero tolerance, so he's out of school for a year, come get him right now. And I'm thinking, you don't understand, we're the recovery family, you know. I mean, I thought I was Mr. AA, and that's when I started taking credit for my own sobriety. And we tried to get him into any kind of school that would take him, where he got kicked out in the middle of the year for the 8th grade. Well, nobody in a private school wants a kid kicks out of a public school for drugs. So Diane thought she was going to have to drop out of school and homeschool, which would have been really challenging because they were a lot alike. And I don't mean that in a bad way. And so at the last minute, he got into this alternative learning center. But the alternative learning center, I had to pick him up at a 5-minute window every day from 5 minutes to 2 to 2 o'clock. And it was all the way into Nashville. Now, I operated a sod farm at the time, and it was all the way on the western edge of Davidson County, out west of Nashville. So I had to leave work about 1 o'clock every day and drive into Nashville and pick him up in this 5-minute window and either take him back to work with me or take him to our house in South Nashville and drive back out to my farm. And I had to work extra for a whole year. And I've got great contempt prior to investigation. I'm thinking, is this my reward for staying sober and sponsoring all these guys? My kid gets kicked out of school and I got to work extra hours because of it. But what I didn't know is it forced me to spend time with my son that I wouldn't have spent with him because I worked all the time. And I got to know him that year on a level that's priceless today. I mean, he was in the 8th grade then. Now he's 37 now. He's lived in California for almost 17 years. And I have a bond with him because I was forced to do that. And he's a lot like me. He knows he really likes to drink and do those other things. And about a year and a half ago, I don't know the details, but he apparently really burned his life to the ground. And he hadn't had a drink since April the 7th of last year. And he's been to some meetings with me. He actually went to treatment early in his teenage years. And I had to have a conversation with him, and I said, look, I'm really happy for you, and I'm proud of you for not drinking for a year and a half, and I hope that's working for you. And I said, you know what AA means to me, but I want you to know I love you just the way you are, and if you never go to AA, that's okay. Don't ever think I think anything less of you. If there's something that AA can do for you, I hope you'll take advantage of it, but I want you to know there's no pressure here, because I see some people whose kids are in the fellowship that have a hard time because they think they have something to live up to. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about my next door neighbor. And by the way, my story is about forgiveness and redemption. When I made that list, when I put Mr. Logan on there, who was my next door neighbor, Buff said, this is easy. He said, you need to go to apologize to him. He said, you don't need to go tell him you're sorry. He said, they know what a sorry son of a gun you are. He said, but you need to go apologize to him, and you need to go plant him another weeping cherry tree. He said, now you don't need to go tell him you know how it died. He doesn't know that you poisoned a tree, so don't do that. It won't add anything to your life. And so I'm thinking, man, I got to go face this guy. And I hadn't talked to him in years, I don't know about anybody else, but when I get an amend that I become aware of, these people just kind of appear. And I pull in my driveway coming back from the backroom group on a Sunday morning, and I see my next door neighbor out there on his riding lawnmower. And I stopped at the foot of my driveway, and my heart just really started pounding. I put the car in park, and I said, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to say here. Please give me the right words to say here. And just let me get this right. Give me the power to do this. And I got out of my car and I walked around the 6-foot-high wood fence that I'd put up after he sued me to try to screen him out. And I'm walking over there to him, and he sees me coming towards him, and he's on this riding lawnmower, and his eyes get just white. We hadn't spoken in years. And he has this look on his face like, can I get this lawnmower in a high enough gear to outrun this guy, or should I abandon ship and run? I mean, he didn't want to see me. But he turned that lawnmower engine off, and I went over there to him, and I said, Mr. Logan, can I talk to you for a minute? He said, sure, what is it? I said, I did a terrible thing cutting your trees down. And I've disrespected you and your wife for a long time. And all that was wrong. I wish I hadn't done any of that. I'm trying to change some things in my life, and I don't know what I can ever do to make up for the damage I've caused you. But if there's anything I can do to make up for the damage I caused you, I'm willing to do whatever it is. Now, I didn't mean to say that. I really didn't mean to say I'll do anything you want me to do. I really didn't. But I asked God to direct what came out of my mouth, and that's what came out of my mouth. And I thought the man would just say, get off my property and don't you ever come near me again. Because that's how I dealt with people got in my way. Get out of my life. And I expected that's what he was going to do. And sometimes we hurt people beyond their capacity to love us. And that's what we do. They want to be left alone, and that's just what we do. I mean, I've got a couple of amends, direct amends on my list that I can't ever make. I can't ever make because I know they're going to cause harm to somebody. But I'm still willing. But I thought that's what he was going to do, is tell me just get off my property. And I was ready to start walking. And instead this man came up and he put his arms around me and he started hugging me and he started crying. He was sobbing on my shoulder. He held me for a while. He pulled back away from me and he looked me right dead in the eye. He said, what's in the past is over. He just forgave me just like that. I was so shocked by what he had done. My mind said, okay, he's forgiven you, run. I wanted to run away. My best thinking said, go, man. And here's what I want to tell you. If I hadn't had clear instructions from my sponsor about what to do, that's what I would have done. And I would have missed what I'm going to tell you now. But I was so desperate to get this deal that I was willing to do what my sponsor told me to do, and he passed on to me what was passed on to him. The greatest thing about having a sponsor is not having somebody that has the emotion I have of my problems. And he knew how to direct me on this. I said, I really appreciate you forgiving me for doing this, but I want to do something to make up for this. And that's when he looked at me again and he said, you already have by coming over here. He said, the thing that hurt us the most all these years was that we'd lost our neighbor. And we've been praying every day that our neighbor would come back, and now our prayers have been answered. And I'd been pulling my driveway every day cussing him, and he'd been praying for me every day. My sponsor told me about a year later, he said, you know, if you ever get your higher power's not big enough, why don't you just borrow Mr. Logan's for a while? I said, well, I appreciate you forgiving me, but I really want to do something. He said, well, you already have by coming over here. I said, well, I noticed your cherry tree died over there. Can I plant you another tree? He said, well, you don't have to do that. And I said, well, I'd like to do that if you'll let me. And he said, well, Miss Logan would like that. Well, I didn't have my people anymore. My business got worse. I mean, after I got sober, my business got worse for a year or two because I made a lot of bad decisions. But I worked hard and I did everything I could for my recovery, and eventually my business got okay. But I didn't have my people anymore. Thank God y'all are my people now. But my older son, who doesn't even remember doing this, I think he was like 12 at the time, he and I went and got a bigger weeping cherry tree and we planted it in this man's yard. And I carry a letter around in my big book. And when I got this letter, I thought it was really nice of him to read this, but I didn't realize I'd get to read this to so many people and it might mean something to somebody. You know, one of the things I've learned, I've become aware of, is the actions I took a long time ago. I was just trying to put the fires out of my life at the time. I didn't realize that they would still be paying me dividends 29 years later. That doesn't mean that I'm relying on the actions I took a long time ago. It just gets better. I'm planting better seeds and I'm harvesting better crops because I'm not planting weeds anymore. But this is a letter Mr. Logan wrote to me, and this is dated June 26, 1991. Dear Mike, it was with much surprise that we found a beautiful cherry tree in our yard when we returned home yesterday. We had not expected it so soon. We appreciate it so very much, and we will care for it, and we will cherish it always, not only for its own sake, for it is a beautiful tree, but because it symbolizes a deep and lasting friendship between us and you and your family. We pray that God will bless you and your family in all that you do, and we pray for ourselves, for we are a sinful people by nature. There are none of us without fault, and we need His constant love and forgiveness. Again, we thank you for the tree. We're all the more grateful because you did not have to do it. Your friendship means more to us than you know. Most sincerely, George Logan. This man gave us a box of Omaha steaks or a country ham for Christmas every year until he died. My dad died about a year later, and the very first flowers that came to the funeral home was a big wreath of purple orchids for Mr. Logan, and I've still got one of those on my desk at home. A couple years later, 6 years later, he passed away. I used to be too busy, I thought, to show up for weddings and funerals and graduations and stuff for other people. But you guys taught me to suit up and show up, so I went to this funeral for Mr. Logan. And it was in this big Baptist church in our neighborhood, and I go in there and this church is full of people. And I don't know anybody in there. But I'm going through the receiving line, and I'm shaking hands. And I shake hands with this one man, and he said, "Oh, yeah, you're Mr. Allison. Dad told us all about you." And I'm going, "Oh, great." He said that you'd had a disagreement, but that you'd made it right. And you see, I'd have gone to the grave hating that man if I hadn't been desperate enough to do the steps that my sponsor told me to do. You know, after I started making those amends, the promises did come true for me. You know, my life really changed after that. And I know we read the promises in a lot of meetings. We always read them in my meeting, but I want to read them again because this is the good stuff from steps 8 and 9. This stuff really happened to me. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. I want to close with something Bill Wilson wrote. I get Grapevine Quote of the Day. You know, you can get that email to you every day. And this is the October 3rd reading. And this is something Bill Wilson wrote in 1961. Let us remember that great legion who still suffer from alcoholism and who are still without hope. Let us, at any cost or sacrifice, so improve our communications with all those that they may find what we have found, a new life of freedom under God. I got to remember every day that I don't have to come to AA. I get to come here. I get to come here. You know, and I love God. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love all you people, and I really love this good life. Thanks for listening.